They lost to that.
Feel free to continue enjoying breakfast, but I would like us to focus our attention for a moment on the Parsha, as we do every Thursday morning. And before I study with you the text that I would like to, I want to share with you one text just because when I read it, I was so struck by the seasonality of it that I can't not. There's a verse in this week's Parsha that says, "V'hayita mishuga mimar'eh einecha asher tir'eh," which means that you'll be crazed by the things that your eyes will see. And Rabbi Shimon Sofer says the following: Einecha, he understands the word einecha, which literally means your eyes, as einei ha'eda manhigecha, the eyes of the community, i.e. your leaders. And he then goes on to say, Tishtaga v'teitzei mida'atcha keshetistakel bero'echa umanhigecha mahem umihem. That you will become crazed and you'll go out of your mind when you look at those people who are your leaders and the ones who lead your community, when you see who they are and what they are. And it struck me as we've been exposed to now 2 weeks of convention and face the prospect of many weeks of electioneering, that one sometimes feels a little bit crazed by the who and the what that we are confronted with as leaders and potential leaders across the spectrum. And unfortunately we see over the years, not just here but everywhere, that our leaders often don't reflect the highest values that we might aspire to or hope for, but often end up behaving in ways that are remarkably disappointing. And we've seen it here, we've seen it in Israel, we've seen it around the world. And so my hat's off to Rabbi Shimon Sofer for his wonderful political insight. And I'm kind of curious what it was that was going on in his own day that inspired his comment in the first place. But for our primary learning this morning, I want to focus on a verse that we read earlier. And it says, "V'amarta lifnei Adonai Elohecha, bi'arti ha'kodesh min habayit, v'gam netativ la'levi, la'ger, la'yatom, v'la'almana." And you will say before Adonai your God, I have removed the sacred from my house, and I have given it to the Levite, to the stranger, to the widow, to the fatherless. Kachom mitzvatcha asher tzivitani, according to all of the commandments which you commanded me. Lo avarti mimitzvotecha velo shachachti. I did not violate any of your commandments, and I didn't forget. And the Sfat Emet, in his comment, starts, Im mekayim ha-mitzvah, harei mimela einam shochachim ota. That if I assert and can say in honesty that I've fulfilled the commandment, then by definition, I haven't forgotten. So he's troubled by what seems to be a redundancy, an unnecessary couple of words in the verse. And he goes on to say, Nireh shelo kein hadavar. No, it's not quite as you might think. Efshar lishkoach mitzvah af al pi shelemarit ayin mekaymin ota. That even though it looks on the surface, it appears to others that one is fulfilling the mitzvah, in point of fact, one may in fact be forgetting even in the midst of the performing of that mitzvah. How so? Im asiyata hi bli chavana mitoch hesach hadat umachmat hergel. If you do the mitzvah without intent, without the right focus, if you do it simply out of habit and pro forma, if it's just a rote function, then in fact you have forgotten Because what you've forgotten is the underlying purpose and meaning for the performance of the mitzvah in the first place. And then he goes on. And this is the forgetting that is referred to in the verse. And it is often true that people who go through the performance of mitzvot, their minds are somewhere else. They may be davening, but they're thinking about the business meeting that they have to go to. They're lighting Shabbos candles, but they're thinking about the food that's in the oven. There may be a whole bunch of things that distract us away from being focused in the moment. And so he understands this verse, Lo avarti al mitzvotecha, kiyamti otam. Lo avarti means I didn't violate any of your commandments, means that I fulfilled all of my obligations. V'lo shachachti, and he says I didn't forget at the end, is that I did it with true focus and intent. And he ends with that the phrase L'shem yichud kudsha brichu. He dips into a little bit of mysticism, and the underlying concept of the phrase is L'shem yichud kudsha brichu is actually a phrase that appears in Jewish mysticism. It's the idea of bringing together the sparks of the holy that were scattered through the world when the spheres that allowed the divine energy to flow from the realm of God into the realm of human existence, into the realm of the real, into the realm of the concrete. The spheres shatter because they can't contain the power of the divine energy, and the shards of it are scattered. And part of the Jewish mystical doctrine was the idea that our actions, our behaviors had the ability to liberate the sparks that were trapped in the shards that were strewn through the universe. By the way, that's a really, really simplified version of Jewish mysticism, just for the record. But that's what you get in 42 seconds.
Rabbi, the time period of this guy, the rabbi is here.
Sfatim is fairly late. Late 18th, early 19th century.
He's picking up something that's not current.
I'm sorry?
The mysticism time period.
He's picking up on Lurianic doctrines that have been floating around for centuries. He's not innovating anything. He's just essentially saying that it is only when you have the proper focus in the performance of the mitzvah that you can actually fulfill this function. Yep.
So then would he be saying that if you're not davening or you don't have the proper kavanah, that it diminishes the mitzvah?
He wouldn't say it. I don't know if I'd say diminishes. Well, actually, he might say that. I wouldn't say that because I think the Sfadem would probably agree that, especially when it comes to prayer, prayer is almost a bit of a roller coaster because it's really very difficult to maintain that sense of complete focus all the way through the davening for many people. But that you will, at moments of the davening, hopefully have that pinnacle moment when not only are you focused on the activity, but it all coalesces and you have this really powerful sense of being in God's presence. Sometimes it can be in that moment when you're reciting that first few words of the Shema. For others, it might be in that moment of privacy and silence in the midst of the Amidah. Or you can be struck by a verse in the Psalms that somehow you've read countless numbers of times, but somehow today it just clicks for you. I remember years ago, following a very tragic death in my congregation in Pennsylvania. The next day was Rosh Chodesh. And I was struck with the phrase in Hallel, Lo hametim yahallelujah. And I say it all the time, but this was particularly powerful for me that moment because the woman had a beautiful voice and she sang, and on Shabbos morning you could hear her wherever you were in the sanctuary. And for her, I read that verse and I cried. And I read that verse I don't know how many times. Didn't strike me. That moment to kick me in the kishnis.
Translation?
Oh, translation of the verse. I apologize. I sometimes forget that I don't have subtitles. Lo hametim hallelujah. The dead cannot praise you. So you never know what in the liturgy, what in the prayer is going to coalesce and strike you, because so much of what happens in prayer is about what's going on in your reality. You know, the prayer that we do in the Amida for those who are ill. If, thank God, everyone in your family is healthy and well, and your circle of friends are well, that prayer may just sort of slide on by. But on a day when, you know, someone you care about deeply is not well, then that prayer is going to resonate with you, and your focus will be there, and your kavanah, your intent will be there. And part of it is, even when you're doing it on a somewhat superficial level, I would say that you could even say that the purposefulness of the activity can still be there. Because I'm doing this with intent. It may not be moving me in this particular moment. I may not feel this rush of passion, but my purposefulness is there. I'm doing this because I want to have this encounter with God. I'm doing this because I see real value in the process of prayer. I'm doing this with a tzibur, with a community, because I see value in praying with other people and enabling certain prayers to be said. So even if one doesn't have the kavana in the prayer moment itself, one has still the kavana that brought one to the prayer.
That's why I was asking, because how do we know, or how does he know, as you said, what's going to strike us, what's going to give that pinnacle moment of prayer?
Very personal thing.
It is a very personal thing. And I think there's almost two levels on which we have to understand kavanah and focus. One is that moment of inspiration, of being inspired and infused by the prayer and infusing ourselves into it. And the other is, I'll call it a more mundane level of kavanah, in the sense of purposeful action, choosing to engage in the activity. Okay, so there's a little thought on biarti hakodesh lo avarti mi mitzvotecha velo shachachti. Not only did I do the mitzvah, but I did it with purpose and with intent and with focus and with a desire to find meaning and the Kadosh Baruch Hu on the other side of the mitzvah.
Shkoach
To you, shkoach to everybody.